All right, we'll get started. Hi, everyone. I'm Jason Moss, the Executive Director of the Jewish Federation of the Greater San Gabriel Pomona Valleys. I want to welcome you today to our town hall in regards to our survey, the community survey we conducted back in March. It was an undertaking, and I think that the results that we found were remarkable and surprising and eye-opening. And I thought what I would do today is kind of go through some of the results and, excuse me a second, seem to have a problem with my PowerPoint, and kind of take it from there and see where things, our kind of conversation goes. And excuse me, this is not working the way I want it to. So give me one moment and let me make sure we'll see what's going on with it. Here we go. All right. Let's try this now. There we go. Okay, so today we are going to go over kind of the overview of the survey, give it some context. The timing in which that it was conducted was remarkable because of what else was happening in the Jewish world at the time. We'll look at the findings, have an opportunity for a question and answer, and then kind of go over some next steps of where we're going to go with this information. So with that, we'll start with the overview. The purpose of the survey, actually, there was 4 purposes. One was to gain a better understanding of who the community is, really kind of get a snapshot in a wide range look at who the community is, how the community members currently engage with the local, national, and even international Jewish community, what the respondents were looking for from the local Jewish organizations, including the Jewish Federation, and of course, how the Jewish Federation can better meet the needs of our local Jewish community. You know, Jewish Federation's mission is to strengthen and enhance Jewish life. And we do that through the programs and services we provide while also serving as the voice for the community. So in many ways, us conducting this survey was right within the mission of the organization, and that we were able to utilize the information for our entire community. The survey was broken up into 5 distinctly different sections. Basic demographics, identity. And identity, you'll see a slight difference between identity and then Jewish identity when we go through it. Israel, so Jewish identity and the Jewish community, and then finally the Jewish Federation as a whole. We had a total of 473 respondents to the survey, which on the one hand sounds like a lot, but it also didn't fully capture everyone we were hoping to get. We were really hoping to have those numbers be even higher, even though the survey respondents were asked to complete it for their household. And we only wanted 1 person per household to complete the survey. Now, this is a map of our community, and actually it goes beyond our community because it clearly addresses where people took the survey. It's based on zip code. As part of the survey, we asked people where they live only by zip code, and we were able to map it out. And so you'll see the individual green spots are if 1 person took it in that individual area, and then the blue is from 0 to 9, and the yellow is from 10 and up. So we were able to really capture an idea of where the community's respondents were coming from, and kind of put it into a map, which was great. One thing you'll notice, as I said earlier, we had some people taking it as far away as San Bernardino, even down in Canyon Lake, North Hollywood, La Crescenta, even down in Cypress and Culver City. It just means that we have people in our community, or that people participate in our programs and activities, that were interested in sharing their thoughts with us. Now, as a backdrop and a context of the survey, as I mentioned, we happened to be conducting our survey after The Pew Research Center had concluded their Jewish Americans in 2020. This was kind of a bookended survey following the Portrait of American Jews in 2013. And then also Jews of Color initiatives beyond the count, the perspectives and lived experiences of Jews of Color. Jews of Color Initiative is a national program based in the Bay Area, looking at ways to support Jews of color. And we'll come back to this group in a moment. But the reason why I bring this up is contextually, our survey took place with this as a backdrop. So a national survey looking at who Jewish Americans are in 2020 was astounding. The key findings from Pew's study are as follows. People are engaging Judaism differently than ever before. Where it once used to be seen as people having to feel like they needed to belong to a synagogue or a JCC, keep kosher or other ways, synagogue affiliation has been on the decline. Affiliation as a whole of an organized way is on the decline. And yet Jewish affiliation, any aspect of how people consider themselves part of the Jewish community, has been on the incline. And people are finding different ways to engage now. In many ways, it's kind of like everyday experiences, everything from eating Jewish food, watching Jewish TV shows or movies with the rise of TV shows like Steisel and Unorthodox on Netflix, and really just engaging in Jewish or Israeli themes in so many different other ways. And this new form of Jewish expression is critical for Jewish communities and organizations to consider because of the context in which they are taking place, because this is our community. This is how people are engaging Jewishly today, and we need to keep that in mind moving forward. The second, which I'm going to have to find momentarily, there you go, is the American Jewish community is becoming more ethnically and racially diverse. And this is where I bring up the Jews of Color initiative, because what we're learning, and again, Jews of color, or the better term is ethnically and or racially diverse, is made up of Jews from African, Asian, Latin, and many other ethnic backgrounds. So the non-Ashkenazic and Sephardic traditions, where we used to only feel like people were coming from, is on the rise. And with that is their experiences that they're sharing as part of this Jews of Color initiative Beyond the Color survey. That is critical because it captures the experiences that ethnically and racially diverse Jews have had in the Jewish community, how alienated they've been feeling, and what we can learn from that and extrapolate in a larger way is kind of how we can better engage and welcome all Jews and not make people feel less than if they don't know or look the part, because unfortunately there's no longer a clear look, but more so a matter of what can we do with this information to engage the community and provide them the experiences and make them not feel less than, but part of. You know, that questioning of the idea of authenticity. It needs to stop. And one of the things that we're finding from the survey results, not really our survey, but the national surveys, is that there is a critical mass that is experiencing these, I don't want to say persecution because that's too strong, but alienation in many ways of not being included. And we need to keep that in mind. The third is a new category is forming called Jews of No Religion, or just Jewish. This is basically anybody that does not feel tied into a specific denomination, but really consider themselves Jewish. In the Pew Research study, there was a 29% rate of this Jews of No Religion, which again, it's a weird nomenclature, but it's this idea of they are Jews and they are engaging in Jewish activities and consider themselves Jewish. So we need to keep that in mind. The fourth aspect is that anti-Semitism and hate is on the rise, which I think we can all understand and we've been seeing in many ways. But one of the nice things is that in our community, we're not seeing it to the same level as they are in other areas. However, with this rise of anti-Semitism and hate, there are certain things that we can be doing to combat it, and really standing up and calling it out whenever it is, and holding others accountable when they don't stand with us. And so it's something that's going to be part of it's been part of our history for a long time, but really will be part of our future as well. And part of that has to do with this next item, which is having to do with Israel. One of the things we found is that Israel is still important, receives strong support from the older generations, but it's the younger generations that do not have the same connection and ties to Israel as others. In fact, because of the past Israeli administration, millennials, college-age Jews are becoming more critical of Israel. And it's going to play into a lot of what our future connection with Israel is. And it's just something for us to keep in mind and be aware of. So with that, we'll move into our community survey findings. So I'm going to put the data up so you have a few minutes to look at it and consider it. One of the things that we saw from the survey is that the respondent rate was of an older population. As you'll notice in the top left, it says that 79% of all respondents were 50 years and older. And so a lot of the data, we understand, has been skewed in that to that age group because that's the people responding. But it's enlightening to see that of those that have children, 80% have sent them to religious school, Sunday school, and Hebrew school. 85% are planning to or already have had their child become bar bat mitzvah. 50%, sorry, I'm looking at our participant rate. We had people that's, about half the population that took the survey that have children have their kids going to a Jewish summer camp. And now we move into this idea of identity. And this is what I was talking about, Jews of color, ethnically and racially diverse. We did want to know how many people have in their household at least one member of the LGBTQ plus community. Part of this is the idea of understanding who the community is and who's making up of the community. And then, of course, we're also seeing a 13% rate of Jews of color or ethnically or racially diverse. And that is following the national trend, which is good to know, especially in light of knowing that we are in the backyard, or our backyard is a significantly high Asian population. In fact, San Gabriel Valley has one of the largest Asian populations in the entire country behind New York. And so giving this some context for us, it's important to understand that our community is matching the national community. And ultimately, this is the new face of our community. Having to do with Israel, Israel is still very strong connection for everybody in the community. Again, 86% of the respondents, so we're talking 381 of the 429 people responded, said that Israel is either very important or somewhat important to them individually. And what was interesting is to learn that 69%, so 304 respondents, said they've traveled at least once to Israel or have lived in Israel before. And so we do have a strong connection in that idea of Jewish identity. But again, it goes back to older population taking the survey and the younger generation, even though there have been attempts made through things like Birthright Israel to connect younger Jews, with the rise of BDS on the college campuses, and in many ways, some of the lack of understanding of Israel and the role Israel plays for a younger generation is going to need to be addressed. And it was actually one of the questions that was asked leading into today's town hall as to how we can combat it. And we'll come back to that in a moment. The next category of questions was this Jewish identity and Jewish community. And I want to give you a moment just to look over this information so you have a chance to kind of see the different things that we asked about. Not only certain statements, but also what Jewish values they felt were important, how deeply connected they felt to our community, and if there was interest in actually engaging in a stronger way with the community. In regards to synagogue affiliation, you'll notice that 80%, 81% of the respondents belong to a synagogue. And this was the breakdown of where they belong. And then also what was fascinating to me were the rationales as to why some people don't belong to synagogues. And this idea of money has always been a prevalent understanding and a belief that many people don't join synagogues because of the cost. But I think that the one that is even more interesting is the idea that it's not relevant to them, and that there's not they don't have a spirituality, and they don't have friends at the synagogue. This idea of relationship, the idea of what a synagogue provides people, in many ways, for those that belong to synagogue, get it. And those that are choosing not to belong to synagogue haven't found that connection, whether it is individual, that they're not able to find it, or it's the synagogue, or whatever their experience has been, they are choosing not to affiliate with the synagogue and join a synagogue, which has always been that traditional way to connect to a community. We also wanted to find out, beyond synagogues, whether people belong to or participate with any other Jewish organization. And about over 240 people said yes, they do. And this was the breakdown on the right, the top 18 organizations. We tried to capture as many Jewish organizations we could think of that were a lot more mainstream. You'll notice Federation was at the top. It's not surprising. We sent it to our Jewish Federation's mailing list, so that those that were participating theoretically were already connected to the Federation. But look at the breakdown of what the other organizations that people are supporting. Organizations like Simon Wiesenthal and Holocaust Museum LA, both focusing on the Holocaust. Jewish National Fund, that goes more than just planting trees in Israel, is doing a lot more activity. Mazon, ADL, Hillel, Stand With Us, J Street. We have a wide swath of connection for people, or people in our community are choosing to connect in a variety of different ways, in many ways in these national organizations, which is great because that means there is an interest in connecting with not just our local community, but national and even international causes along the way too. And then finally, we move into the Jewish Federation's, the data that we got for the Federation. What was surprising is that the book festival, Jewish Book Festival, which is beginning later this month, actually 2 weeks from yesterday, was the most well-known program the Jewish Federation provides. Gan Shalom was second. J-Life SGPV, our community's monthly magazine, that at this point, when the survey was being conducted, was mailed home, was the third largest. That 67% of everybody that took the survey said that this is what they know about most. And then Jewish Food Festival, which was only conducted one time, was also up there. But one of the other aspects of the survey that we were really hoping to get was a better understanding of what people were looking for the Federation to be providing more of into the community. And so these next series of questions really gauge that idea to provide us more insight and thought as we begin, as the Jewish Federation staff and Board of Governors begin to look at strategically what we need to be looking at possibly providing to the community in the near, mid, and even future Jewish of our years. So and then ultimately, again, what we can do a better job of. One, things that we can actually focus our energies on. You know, hosting large-scale community gatherings like the Jewish Food Festival is right up there. Collaborating with, bringing the Jewish organizations in our community together to avoid duplicating of efforts, fostering collaboration as a whole, working together is of interest. And then looking at really future programs. Excuse me, it's not surprising that the population that took the survey was looking for more support for the community seniors, which we know is an area that we need to do a much better job of. but also things like a speaker series and even an emergency fund to support community members in need. Think of it kind of as that rainy day fund that you have for yourselves when something breaks at home, but having this support system for the community so that in times of need, the Jewish community can turn to itself to support those that are in need. And we got a whole wide range of other suggestions as well, which we're looking at. So based on this information, I'd love to be able to open this up to hear any questions you might have. And I ask you to either unmute yourself to ask the question or type it into the chat, because it's an opportunity for us to kind of deal with some of this information and figure out how we're going to handle this moving forward. I do want to address one first that came in, is somebody had asked about the idea, they would love to hear my thoughts on how to address Israel issues within our Jewish organizations, since it's clearly such a divided issue. Israel is always going to be a challenge for us, especially in the current state of the country. If you think about it, Israel means wrestle with God. And so we are continually, as a Jewish community, wrestling with this because there's different viewpoints of this. And in my estimation, the best thing that we can do is, rather than avoid the conversation, we need to be having more conversations and opening the table, so to speak, to hearing differing views. I think many of us go to events like this to be able to hear about different viewpoints, but we sometimes fall into the habit of trying to convince somebody of a specific view that is theirs, instead of kind of opening up the dialogue and holding more dialogue and understanding where everyone's coming from. We know Israel is difficult, partly because we don't live there. We don't understand what it is like. We have a direct tie to Israel. And because of that direct tie, we also are confronted with anti-Judaism and a rise of anti-Semitism because of that connection. And so what happens in Israel does affect American Jewry. But I think that the more that we can educate ourselves and educate others about not just the difficulty, but the different options that exist and what Israel is providing to the world, can really help to enhance what people understand Israel to be. And even as we have differing opinions, whether it's one state, two state, no state, but our country, or governed by the UN, or whatever iteration it's going to be, the more that we can discuss it and share ideas, the better we will be, because we'll be educating ourselves more. But we need to be open and honest and understand that unless we are individually Israelis, and unless we are living there, we do not understand what it is like to experience Israel and what goes into some of the decision-making the Israeli politicians in the parliament, the Knesset, make. So that is the first question I wanted to address. Are there any other questions that people have that are willing to kind of raise? Gal, I see your hand. If you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, I'm driving, so I can't type. I'm sorry. So my question piggybacks the Israel question that you have. What platforms do we have within San Gabriel Valley that we can engage in that Israel talk and help to promote it and help to, I'm coming from a standpoint of, I have lived in Israel. I do have encounters with Israel often. I feel like I am able to contribute to that discussion from the viewpoint of an Israeli. What platforms do I have within San Gabriel Valley that I can stand up and engage in that conversation?
So that's a great question. I think part of the—
And not religious school, because yeah.
No, I don't think it's religious. I think it's the idea of trying to create more opportunities. I think our synagogues and our community partners need to have more opportunities to be engaged with Israel as a whole. Last year we brought the Consul General of Israel to a virtual town hall just like this to share what's going on in Israel. And so those types of platforms can be happening more as we engage with an understanding that we need to be doing more. Jewish Book Festival this year, and this is not a commercial for the book festival, but we happen to have two amazing authors who are going to be discussing Israel as a whole from their individual perspectives. Ami Ayalon, who is a former, give me 1 second. He is a former head of the Shin Bet, the security services of Israel, is going to be discussing his perspective. And an opportunity like that, where the community can come together to hear and listen, is critical. At the end of the book festival, we're having Daniel Sokach from New Israel Fund coming to talk about, in essence, can we talk about Israel? That's the title of his book, A Guide for the Curious, Confused, and Conflicted. What we can do, Gal, is basically invite community members to those type of events. They don't have to be Jewish. It's a chance to educate and in essence, have dialogue with the community as a whole, and then look at opportunities in ways that our community partners, our synagogues, can hold additional forums, additional conversations. But it has to be done in an effective way, because ultimately, if people are not comfortable sharing their viewpoints because of being shot down or being argued with, it can be really difficult. And so it's a matter of trying to understand how and when we can do this in that type of safe environment is critical for us moving forward.
Do you have other platforms other than those two? One of them is during religious school or right after, so I can't do that. But any others, maybe throughout the year?
As of right now, no, but we are always looking at additional ways that we can kind of create more opportunities to bring the community together for Israel. We're going to look at bringing the Consul General again. But again, it's also finding out and asking our individual synagogues to be trying to do more and putting Israel at the forefront of what we're offering, and really trying to set the stage so that more people can have the dialogue and be willing to share their ideas and perspectives or hear from the leading voices of and on Israel.
And if I may suggest also perhaps tools as to what happens if there is a conflict during those platforms. How does the person who's trying to advocate or not advocate or advocate their beliefs, what's the right way to say whatever we have without feeling like we are being hindered to say so?
Right. No, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's something that Federation can kind of work with some of our own individual community partners like Israel Action Network and the Consulate, who can help us in those environments. So thank you for the question and the follow-up question. I really appreciate it. Anybody else have a question? Yeah, Dina, go ahead.
So it's not so much a question as a couple of comments. I noticed that in your list of things that people know about the programs that the Jewish Federation offers, that PJ Library is pretty high on the list, which I think is really quite impressive if most of the people responding were of an older population, that is getting trickled down from the older population to those who it serves. So that's wonderful. The other thing I didn't see on the list was what you do in terms of security and security network information to synagogues, which I think is really important and powerful. I'm just wondering where that fell on the list, because it wasn't in their top 10 or so.
Yeah, let me pull out. It was definitely not in the top 10. Again, part of the challenge, of course, is that Federation does a lot of things behind the scenes. And so many people are not aware of that. I can tell you that, so the Community Security Council, some of that effort you were talking about, 6%, 7% were aware of our what we do to help our community partners, our synagogues, bring them together to help with security. A lot of what Federation is trying to do is really bring people together to collaborate and convene people so that in many ways people are not feeling, and synagogues are not feeling, as isolated in this vacuum of, again, the survey was taken during COVID, but a lot of the issues that every synagogue is facing are very similar. And so of that, again, 7% said they were aware of our community security council. And just to kind of keep that going a little bit within that realm, let me find something else. Support for local Hillels was at 16%. Outreach to a local elected officials, 30%. Liaison with the Israeli consulate, 14%. Our holiday resource guides that we send out every for Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Hanukkah, and Passover, 17%. The fact that the Federation convenes and works together with our community synagogue, schools, and organizations was 24%. And so one of the things we did see from this, Dina, thank you for raising that question, is that Federation has a task to do in improving its communication of what it is that we do. Sometimes it's very hard to understand those aspects that do not fall around a program per se, where people can attend. But, we try to do as much as we can to articulate the work that we do behind the scenes, things like notifying the local school districts twice a year so that they have an 8-year calendar of our holidays, so that no child and no parent is put in a position to feel like they have to choose whether they go to school or whether they celebrate the holiday. So we try to do that twice a year and remind the superintendents that a child cannot be penalized for missing school for religious observance. And also on the same lines, because of that relationship we've developed, when issues of anti-Semitism arise and the community lets us know about it, we can work with the school districts to bring in organizations like ADL to conduct assemblies or work with the district to help address these types of hatred as a whole. But that's through the partnerships that we develop over the years. So Dina, thank you for that question about security, because sometimes that stuff does go unnoticed unless you're the one dealing with it in the moment and are aware of it as a whole. We could have a whole litany of everything we do, which was part of the reason why we asked all that in the survey, was as a way to say, hey, look at all the Federation does. And it wasn't so much to pat ourselves on the back. It's more a matter to make more people aware of it. And again, with the survey, if they're not aware of it, what can we be doing a better job of to clearly define and share those experiences that we're having and doing as a whole. So thank you again.
Thank you. I do have one last question.
Okay.
You said you had 473 respondents. What fraction of your total population, if you will, do you think that was?
So we have we are still using, although the 2020 census data came out, I have not had a chance to kind of delve into it a little deeper than I want to. The data that we've been using, which is the 2010 census data, tells us there are between 30 and 45,000 Jews in the greater San Gabriel Pomona Valleys. Of that, Federation has a mailing list of about 35 to 4,000 when you add in our PJ Library families. So of that, we had over, talking about a 12%, 11% response rate on the survey. Again, surveys, people choose to take surveys, some don't. We tried to make the survey as user-friendly as possible as a way to make it not as intimidating. It was 37 questions. If you didn't have a child at home, you didn't get a series of other questions. We tried to add in the logic to it. We tried to make the survey between 10 and 15 minutes. We advertised it a lot. We thank our community partners, our synagogues, who promoted it, because ultimately a lot of this data was able to be shared with them as well to kind of capture a better understanding of who and what the community is and what people are looking for. So roughly about 11%, not as high as we'd like, but at the same time, it's still within a ballpark of other surveys that have been done across the country.
Great. Thank you, Jason.
Any other questions? Okay. So now the question becomes, what do we do with all this information? And that becomes our next step. Part of our next step was actually this town hall to articulate and share what the findings are. It was we also included an article in J-Life, in October's issue of J-Life, and provided the data as well. We also have shared the data with our community partners. And again, I keep referring to community partners. There are synagogues and schools, as a way to provide this information that kind of gives a better sense of who our community is, where all of us are working, how all of us are engaging, and really hoping that each individual synagogue is able to utilize that information in their thinking moving forward, their planning. We are going to be bringing this back up at our annual meeting. You're the first people to know. I have just secured Dr. Stephen Windmuller, who is one of the leading Jewish voices on the Jewish community out of HUC, Hebrew Union College, who will be our keynote speaker at our annual meeting on Sunday, January 9th. And he and I will be discussing the future of our Jewish community based on, I'll be looking at a very localized perspective based on our survey. But Dr. Windmuller will be bringing up things like the Pew Research Center, Jews of Color. In fact, there was just completed a Jewish population, the Los Angeles Jewish Community Population Survey was just completed over the last few weeks, and that will be presented and the results will be shared in January or February. So we are that's part of what's going to be happening. Again, part of it's educating the community as a whole and making sure that people are aware that we're listening and open to ideas. Since I've been at Federation, I've been really concerned about wanting to make sure that we are meeting the needs of the community. And the only way we can do that is by there being a dialogue and understanding that it is a two-way street. We're going to keep doing what we're doing. Some of our programs will be long lasting because we do know they fill a void and people enjoy them. But if there's certain things that we need to add and bring about, we will do that as well. The other thing is that, again, we had the survey results in JLife in October. We will also be posting them on our website so that more people can see it. And then we're also going to be sharing this video, which I'm recording this town hall, as a way to show it to others so that we can be, again, more open and not really honest. But I'm not trying, it's not that we're not being honest, but more open to how do we move the community forward. One of the things that I think is important for us to understand is we are in a time of change. And the Jewish community as a whole is different than when each one of us were growing up. And we're engaging differently. And if our organizations do not evolve to meet the needs of this changing culture, then they're not going to be around for much longer, because we are in a consumeristic society. And people are choosing to engage in a variety of different ways. And one of the things that we're finding from this survey and Pew and other surveys all across the country is that how do Jewish organizations stay relevant? As, again, it's not just synagogues that are having a declining affiliation. Churches and mosques are also seeing a very similar downturn in their affiliation and membership. And so organizations have to evolve, and that's why you have organizations popping up. Now, what I didn't address really at all was current and post-COVID, and how Jewish organizations and how Jews are going to engage Jewishly, because we're going to have people that are never setting foot in a building again because they don't want to be around crowds, or more so, because they've gotten comfortable engaging with their Judaism from their couch, from their home, online. They're able to attend services now. We can attend services all across the country. As an example, my daughter is currently at school in Birmingham, Alabama. And this year, in order to spend the holidays with her, my family streamed services at where she was at a Reformed synagogue in Birmingham. Now, I attended services here as well, but it was a chance to kind of see what else is going on. And so with the rise of these new hybrid formats, this live and this in-person and virtual format, we're going to have more people engaging or choosing to engage in a variety of different ways. And our organizations need to continue to evolve and adapt, because that is what our community is going to be doing itself. And so part of the idea of our next steps is not just Jewish Federation looking at how do we provide resources and programming and activities and services to meet the needs of the community as everything's evolving, but how do we work with our community partners, our synagogues and schools, taking information that we're getting from national surveys like this and imparting that understanding and bringing them together to discuss the future of our community. I can tell you that Jewish Federation is already begun exploring what we can be providing, whether it's through programming or whether it's better meeting the needs of the community. And how do we engage? And Dina, you brought up PJ Library. PJ Library is an incredible organization. Those of you that don't know, in many ways, it's engaging families where they are at the comfort level they're at, by allowing them to sign up to receive free Jewish books on a monthly basis, provided for their children 0 to 12 years old. PJ Library is 0 to 8, birth to 8, and PJ Our Way is 9 to 12. But they get books mailed to them directly to their house as a way to enhance their Jewish experiences at home. And learning from organizations like PJ Library and others are giving us insight and perspective of how we can better engage the community, appreciate how people are engaging, and reminding them there are other ways to engage when they are ready. And that becomes the next phase for us as a community, as an organization, and working with our community partners to provide that same opportunity. So the future is going to change. The Jewish community is definitely changing. And in some ways, it's not for a bad thing. I think it really is a good situation that we're going to fall under as long as we continue looking at how we can evolve and better meet the needs of the community, not imposing our own vision of what their needs are, but better understanding of what those needs are by having that dialogue with not just community members, but really community members with organizations like the Jewish Federation, our local synagogues, and others. So thank you all so much for attending. If you have additional questions or thoughts, please feel free to email or call. Like I said, we're going to be holding not this type of an event, but our annual meeting is going to focus on the future of the community. And we will be able to continue to provide more insight and perspective moving forward. So thank you again, and I hope you have a great rest of the day.